You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Bryan, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. One of the biggest challenges for agriculture is that we export a tremendous amount of material out of our food system. All of the food that we use, that we eat, goes to humans, and that waste gets disposed of, and the nutrients never ever seem to get reclaimed, never go back onto the land again. That's a tremendous drain on resources, but it's also, those resources could be well used to grow new crops. Recently, there have been some projects more talking about circular economies and trying to reclaim some of these nutrients and get them back into the system. The Rich Earth Institute is doing one of those projects. It's a urine recycling and reclamation project, if you like, or as somebody coined it, pea cycling. We're joined here today by Arthur Davis and Tatianna Schrieber from the Rich Earth Institute. Arthur, Tatianna, welcome to the Back 40.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So that term pea cycling, obviously that would make great copy in a newspaper. Tatianna, where did that come from and what exactly does that mean?
One of our co-founders, Abe Noe-Hayes, was thinking about the fact that in the nutrient cycle, as you were saying, nutrients that we produce no longer go back directly to the land. We flush it and forget it. It goes somewhere far away. And he was just interested in closing that nutrient cycle. So thinking about how can we reclaim those nutrients that our bodies naturally produce and use them as a fertilizer, which is basically how ecosystems work. In an ecosystem, the waste from animals like mammals would naturally be returned to the soil. And we're just one of those animals. So it's really just trying to go back to what naturally would happen in an ecosystem instead of sending our waste somewhere else where it needs to be treated, ends up in waterways and becomes a pollutant.
You talked about a co-founder. Who started this project?
Yeah, so Abe Noe-Hayes and Kim Nace are the co-founders of the organization. And Abe was involved already with very interested in composting and spread out from there to think about urine and how he could best recycle urine and develop a project, and joined with Kim Nace, who was a very good administrative person, and she decided to help him become the administrator of the organization, and they started it back in 2012.
I guess I could just add that I think they were looking at ways to kind of make an environmental difference in the sanitation sector, looking at the various things they could work on, and they came across the fact that most of the nutrients that our bodies are excreting are coming out in our urine. So it's kind of a great access point to be diverting a fairly small amount of the volume, but a very large proportion of the plant available nutrients.
It's an interesting idea, and I was just about to ask why just the urine, and you answered that very nicely there, where the majority of the nutrients are located. But that in itself seems to give rise to a problem there. Our normal sewage systems don't differentiate and don't separate out the urine from the rest of it. How have you overcome that challenge?
Well, our organization started as a very grassroots organization. And so we really started by volunteers collecting their urine. And people bring their urine to our urine depot. But we've since additionally moved to having permanently plumbed toilet fixtures that people have in their homes and also in some commercial establishments. Those can either be, waterless urinals or urine diverting toilets. Some fixtures, they take maybe a little bit of practice to use. And so, they might not be the best choice for a public toilet or something like that. We actually have a new spin-off company, which is a company called Brightwater Tools. We're working on building scale technologies for waste reclamation. One of the markets for that would include full service feces and urine.
Right.
As I said, it's an easy access point for starting to do this work because I think both the most nutrients and not having to deal with all the volume. It also, I think, is an easy place for people psychologically to start because there's a little bit less kind of taboo about urine comparatively.
I was going to say something along those lines in terms of the term pee cycling too, because people are comfortable talking about pee. They're not as comfortable talking about feces. So it was an easier place to start, but we're very aware that the human waste problem is both things, and both things need to be addressed. There was one thing that came out of our social research, but we found to be fairly helpful for people to hear about, which is the idea that when we've done our research and we've asked people how you feel or how comfortable you are with using urine as using urine as a fertilizer, people often say, well, I feel pretty comfortable about it, but I'm not sure if my neighbor or my friend, they might be uncomfortable with it, or they think other people are going to be uncomfortable with it. But we found that the concern that people have is really more about the issues we talked about, the potential of pharmaceuticals or the practical issues, the logistics, whatever, but they're more concerned about those things than they are about feeling disgusted. In other words, disgust is not a huge problem.
Fair enough. I mean, we're worried about what other people are going to think, and we're comfortable with it, but we don't necessarily think that everybody's going to be. A lot of times, though, people are far more accepting when they find out what the benefits are from it.
When we talk to farmers, I've asked the farmers questions like, well, how have your employees felt about this? Or how, because some of our farmers work with young interns or with students. They'll usually say something like, I thought it was smelled kind of funky at first, but they thought it was kind of cool. The farmers, generally speaking, don't have a problem because they're used to using manure and animal urine, so they don't really see it. But some of their employees who are new to farming may have a question about it, but they get over it pretty quickly too.
Yeah, it very quickly becomes just another task that we do on the farm.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, you've probably heard of the program Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs. I was a hog farmer when I first saw the episode of one of those that makes the list is hog farming.
Uh-huh.
And he went through a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm like, man, you haven't even got to the bad stuff yet.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, like I've often heard from farmers when we ask them these questions, any issues, any problems that you've had with this? And they'll often say something like, well, when we applied it, it smelled kind of strong, but certainly not any worse than anything else we deal with around here. It's like, right. It's much less problematic than some of the other things they have to deal with.
You've touched a bit on the idea of collection there and the idea of the separation of it, people actually collecting it and bringing it in. But if you're going to be using toilets or urinals that separate this out inside the house there, then that's obviously going to go into some sort of a storage unit. How have you overcome the idea of the collection of this so far?
Yeah, so we've worked with the state of Vermont, with the Department of Environmental Conservation, which oversees on-site wastewater treatment. Vermont is a pretty rural place, so lots of people have on-site wastewater systems. So we've kind of established a alternative, innovative pathway for people to have urine collection storage tanks as part of their on-site wastewater system at their house. Whether it's a residence or there's a library, there's a brewery that we're working with. So they have a tank that fills up, then we come and pump it out. Just like you might, get your oil tank for heating fuel filled up. We're just doing the opposite.
So we've covered the collection of it. What about what you do with it now? How do you process it? What's the idea? What all do you have to do once that comes back to your facilities?
So right now, the only processing that we do is pasteurization, and that's to deal with any potential pathogen risk. And so that has allowed our pasteurized urine product is classified then as a Class A exceptional quality biosolid per the state rules, which gives us unrestricted access for its use. There's no restrictions on what crops we use it on, where we use it within the state of Vermont. We mostly have been using it over the years on hay fields. And hay is a very nitrogen-hungry crop. One of our farmers was a former dairy farmer, but he hasn't had cows for a long time, so he hasn't had any nutrient input on his hay fields. He was slowly, depleting his nutrients from his hay fields. So he was very excited to be able to have this option. There are other farmers who use conventional fertilizer, but have been really excited to take what they can get from us and then basically be replacing a portion of their conventional fertilizer.
And I would just add to that, most of the farmers we've worked with so far have been partnering with us on various research projects to learn more things that we want to learn about how this works. But our research projects have involved, in addition to hay, we've trialed it on sweet corn, cut flowers. Currently, we're starting a project. We're going to explore using it on trees and shrubs. Hemp. Somebody was doing figs trees in a controlled environment in a greenhouse, and we trialed it to try to get an earlier start with these figs, get them going sooner. For that purpose, it seemed to work really well.
So what's the comparison like with something, say, conventional fertilizer that you'd be using? Are we looking at pretty similar results out of the crop, or have there been challenges there?
It's pretty analogous to a conventional fertilizer. We're applying it in liquid form. So there's advantages and disadvantages to that, but it's all plant available nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so, the nitrogen is largely in ammonia form. So we pay attention a lot to our application conditions to really try to minimize the volatilization of ammonia. One interesting thing about it, compared to wastewater stream, it's very concentrated in terms of its nutrient makeup. Compared to a lot of other agricultural fertilizer products, it's quite dilute. So we say 50 pounds of nitrogen is about 1,000 gallons of urine.
Other farmers have found, in terms of yield, we haven't done very much more yield studies, but in terms of yield and sort of general robustness and health of the crop, they found it to be pretty much equivalent.
You would think there wouldn't be much difference in it. I mean, nutrients are nutrients no matter what the source is.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that is interesting, though, about the urine is that it is a holistic or whole fertilizer. Calcium, magnesium, sulfur, boron, all these other secondary and micronutrients that some plants need. And some of those may turn out to be limiting in a situation or very valuable, so that some farmers are interested in exploring, whether this might be a better fertilizer or another way to get some of those other nutrients.
Yep. So you touched upon this, about 1,000 gallons per acre on just to get 50 pounds of nitrogen. Do you have much problem with that on, say, a hay crop there, where you tend to lose some of the ammonium out of the product as you're spraying it? Do you have to allow for that, or can you overcome that more or less by the time of application and that sort of thing?
Yeah, mostly the latter. We did a study a couple years ago, funded by the USDA SARE program, which is the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, looking at ammonia volatilization. We found that things like applying it in a way where we're minimizing the aerosoling effect.
Mm-hmm.
So our applicator, it's a boom that comes out behind the tank. They call it a band application rather than a spray. So
Right.
The idea of that is, we're really trying to minimize the interaction with the air. If we can, really trying to apply when it's just rained, when the soil is damp and ready to, really, suck in liquid. You're able to really get those nutrients into the soil pretty quickly.
One other thing is we have a new grant to look at bioacidification. And what that is using whey or paper products to ferment as a way to retain more nitrogen. So we're kind of exploring that to see if that's a feasible, means to retain nitrogen in these products. I guess so we have a sort of a larger interest in this whole issue of recycling and best utilizing waste products and things like that. So in the case of the whey and the paper fibers, these would be waste products, or farmers might need to get rid of these products somehow as a byproduct. So if we could use that to then help retain the nitrogen in the fertilizer, then we'd be killing many stones at once. So,
Yes. Yeah, it would be a good use of both products. You mentioned that as a commercial fertilizer, it is a relatively low amount. I would imagine transportation costs on this would be fairly high. Have you done any work on the economics of whether this is an economically feasible project, or is this something that first we get it to work and then we see if we can't make it pay?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the most important. One of the interesting things about the work that we do is that it both has the agricultural benefits of an alternative source of fertilizer. There's clearly some amount of economic value for nutrients, right?
Right.
However, there's also the economic benefit on the wastewater side of things, and keeping nutrients out of waterways where they cause nutrient pollution issues. And those things also have economic costs for many people. So from the economic work that we've done thus far, it seems like there's at least as much, if not more, economic benefit on the pollution prevention and wastewater side of things. which is a little bit hard to parse out for sure. But I think if you just look at it from an agricultural standpoint in terms of the value of the nutrients, certainly the economic cost for transporting it and processing, even a minimal processing like just pasteurization, would probably not compete economically with other commercial fertilizers.
But it's very similar to the problem that we have when we face livestock manure as well. Do you view that as a resource for nutrients, or do you view that as a disposal problem? And at various times, it can be each of them. It's a valuable nutrient, but it might cost you more per nutrient to get it there, but you still have to dispose of it someplace.
Right. And we might as well use it in a place where it's useful as opposed to putting it in a place where it really is causing harm to ecosystems, which then are, also having an impact on human society and rippling throughout the relationships they're in. So
yeah, I would say a couple of things about that also. On the wastewater treatment side, those wastewater treatment plants that do try to get the nitrogen out before they discharge it, that's the most expensive part of their operation. So, we've done interviews with wastewater treatment plant operators and other planners, and they've said if we could reduce that cost for the treatment, that would be a real benefit of this. And then on the fertilizer side, as you know, right now, the fertilizer prices for nitrogen, phosphorus are going up because of war, conflict, and also because of climate change. And one other aspect is that when I've interviewed farmers about this, we usually ask them, would you pay the same or more? Or, how do you feel about the cost? And most of the ones we've talked to say they'd be willing to pay the same price as they pay for a comparable commercial fertilizer, or they might be willing to pay a little more because they care about these environmental benefits that we've just talked about. So in terms of pricing down the road, we haven't got to that point, but we have to look at, what people are willing to pay and why as well.
Totally.
That leads in nicely to the social aspects of this. And you've touched on kind of the reaction that you get from the farmers, which is, they'd pay a little bit more. It has to be economically viable if they're going to continue to stay in business. What about from the collection standpoint here? How has that been received? Have you got lots of volunteers that are willing to be part of the project?
Yeah, I guess, from my perspective, running this kind of on the ground program here, we've had a lot of interest and a lot of people who have been really dedicated in their participation over the last, 10 years, really, since this thing got started. I don't know if surprisingly or not, many people, when they learn about it, it's often a new idea for them, right? Once they hear about the reasons why we do what we do, whether that's they're really interested in the fertilizer production side, whether it's someone who's interested in the pollution side, whether they just are trying to reduce water consumption, I think there's a lot of reasons for people to get behind the idea.
Tatianna?
Yeah, it's been really interesting talking to the people. If people think that they might be a little uncomfortable about it at first, but they usually over time, they become more comfortable with it. It becomes normalized over time. When we talk to people, at first people are like, oh, that's kind of odd, but it makes sense. On the other hand, we've been doing these webinars to talk to people about using urine in their home gardens. Surprising to me how many people then admit that they've already been doing this, or they say that, well, my grandfather or my father used to do this. Also, people who come from other countries because there is maybe more comfortability about using this in some other parts of the world. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, it does. There's a lot of different layers to this. We've got the farmers, we've got the individuals that are doing this. What about governments? How have they received this? Have you had any regulatory issues that you've had to overcome?
We've developed a lot of relationships with regulators in Vermont, and we want to be showcasing what is possible and working with people who are making those rules. We've we've had to do regulatory work. There has been some amount of pushback. And I think that's to be expected. The other thing that we are part of a larger consortium of folks who are working on creating some regulatory frameworks, looking at the current state and kind of where there are potential inroads for making significant progress.
One other aspect is this question of whether urine could be certified for use in organic production.
Right.
That's been a stumbling block for us because the regulations often aren't designed for this product. And so it sort of falls in a gray area right now. Our organic farmers, our certified organic farmers in this country are hesitant to use it because they don't want to jeopardize their organic certification somehow down the road. So, but they're often the ones who are the most interested in using it. So
I would think that would be a good fit for them. But as you say, the regulation's not being designed specifically for it in that gray area. You're right. Farmers are going to be very careful before they tread in there because
they don't like gray areas, right?
No, because somebody can come in and make it black and white against you very quickly, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things, I mean, certainly biosolids is a very controversial topic, at least in the US, and I imagine in Canada as well. And, one of the things about biosolids, right, is that biosolids are a product that is made from the aggregate of things that go to the wastewater treatment plant, as opposed to our product, which has never been mixed with gray water. It's really quite a pure past, so to speak. It's pretty easy to tell where it came from and what would have ended up in it.
So we've talked a little bit about social from the standpoint of the farmers, the people who collect, the government here. What about yourselves? I'm going to start with you, Tatianna. Why do you do this? What drives you for this project? What makes you be so interested in this?
Well, I think I came at it from my background in farming and gardening. I'm a sort of a small scale farmer for most of my life. And I teach in areas of science. So understanding how ecosystems work and that sort of thing. It was clear to me that this was a resource that was being wasted. Also, I was a journalist and I did a story about the idea that we might, run out of easily available phosphorus. And for that story, I interviewed our co-founder, Abe Noe-Hayes, and that's when I learned more about what Rich Earth was doing. And I just found it really interesting. And that was at a moment in my life when I could spare time. So I decided to join the board of the organization for several years and then was hired as staff. I have a degree in environmental anthropology. So I'm interested in human relationships with the natural world. And so I thought maybe I could offer that to the organization to help look at what people thought about this idea of how we use our waste and how could we change the way we think about that. So I'm really interested in seeing if we can change our relationship to nature by changing our way of thinking about what happens to our own waste.
Arthur, how about you?
I grew up right here in Brattleboro. I had heard about Rich Earth Institute before I left for college. I knew various people in the community who had started getting involved. I was studying physical earth science. Anyway, at school, I got involved with our environmental science building that had a on-site wastewater system. It's called a living machine system. It's a kind of designed to mimic the way wetlands remove nitrogen. So that was really neat and kind of introduced me to a lot of these concepts. And I came back and I started working very part-time for them. And I went away again for a couple of years. And then I came back and I've been working here ever since. I love the interdisciplinary nature of the work that we do. Getting to work with people, love getting to work with farmers, help them problem solve and figure out solutions that are going to work. And it feels like a very solutions-based way to look at environmental issues.
It is a thought process that is something that we need to be thinking about and should have been thinking about many, many years ago. The idea that we're going to try and reclaim some of those nutrients from humans that we, at this point, we basically export them and they become a disposal problem for us instead.
Right.
I'll give you one more plug here for the Rich Earth Institute. If people want to find out more about what you do, where do they look for that?
richearthinstitute.org. That's our website. We've got a lot of resources there. We've got information about all of our research and our publications. And then we have a guide for using urine on your home garden with all of the guidelines from the World Health Organization and that sort of thing. And we also have a guide for how to potentially replicate what we're doing in your own community.
One last plug. In early November, we have a conference called the Rich Earth Summit. And it features people from all around the world who are working on this, because we are far from alone. It's been really inspiring to have a place once a year where a lot of those people can come together and share some insights and knowledge, some of the things that they've been working on. So if you're interested in that, you can register at the website richearthinstitute.org.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to this becoming far more mainstream, and we hear more and more about this, and hopefully it's part of the solution to some of the issues that we do have in our large cities that result in polluting that we could potentially clear up with this while making it a resource at the same time. Tatianna, Arthur, thank you very much for joining us.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for your time as well, Mike.
Yeah,
Really,
thanks a lot.
We're just excited that there are folks outside of our own little geographic sphere here who are interested in learning more. So
yeah, and I found since I started doing this, and this might be the 70th episode that I've done. But since I started doing this, I'm reaching a lot further than what I ever anticipated. Like from BC out to the Maritimes in Canada, California, one guest that I interviewed from England. And everybody loves the ones that come from other areas because it's something that we've never really considered. And this idea here, I'm sure a lot of people have thought, hey, why don't we? This is an example of where we actually are doing this. So I think it'll be well received. We've been speaking to Tatianna Schrieber and Arthur Davis from the Rich Earth Institute on the Back 40. You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.